Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to our final lesson on lines and angles. So we have already established that in this diagram, for example, if line A is parallel to line B, then and the transversal crosses through the two lines, that all of the angles that are acute are going to be congruent. So for example, this angle, and then this one of course is vertical, so it's congruent. And then all of these down here are acute, so they are all congruent. All of the acute angles are going to be congruent, and all of the obtuse angles, which would be this one, are congruent, of course, as well as then this obtuse angle is congruent to this obtuse angle. All right, we've already established that. Now, I want to look at another example. So these two angles you see here are both obtuse. Okay, so we know what that means. But I want you to look at another relationship here. So if I were to take a look at these two angles, notice they are both in the same position with regard to the parallel lines and the transversal. They're both on the bottom left side. Take a look at them. Now, there's a special name for these kind of angles. Two angles who have the same position, they have the same relationship to the transversal when parallel lines are cut by a transversal. These angles are called corresponding angles. And you can probably guess that corresponding angles are going to be congruent. All corresponding angles are congruent. Now, something interesting you'll notice is this is not the only pair of corresponding angles. There is another pair here. The ones on the top right are corresponding, so those two are in the same position, so they are congruent. As well as we can take a look at this pair on the top left, which are also in the same position. Those are corresponding, so they are congruent. And finally, we have one more pair, these that are on the bottom right. They are also in the same position, so they are corresponding and congruent. So there are four pairs of corresponding angles. Now, this is going to help us because our task is to find the value of x. And because these are corresponding, they're in the same position, we know that they are congruent. So that means that I can write an equation and solve it. So my equation would look like this. 7x plus 11 is going to equal 116, right? Because they're corresponding, so they're congruent. So now I can solve the equation and find x. So I have to undo the addition or subtraction first. So I subtract 11 from both sides, and I get 105. Then I have to undo the multiplication by dividing. So that's going to be x equals 15. So in this example, x equals 15. And of course, if I were to plug 15 in, 7 times 15 plus 11 is definitely going to give me 105 plus 11, which is 116, which is the same as the other angle. All right. All right, now let's look at another example. So in this example, are these two angles corresponding angles? Well, the answer is, let's take a look. Are they in the same position with regard to the transversal? And the answer is no. Take a look here. This 5x is on the top right, but 16x minus 9 is not. However, this brings up something interesting. If 5x is on the top right, then it is congruent to this angle up here. So we could call this one 5x also. Interesting. Well, that could help us a lot. So that means that if I were to label this one then 5x also, I now have a relationship between these two angles because they make a straight angle. I can write an equation, and my equation would be 5x plus 16x minus 9 equals 180 because they're a straight angle. Well, we know how to solve that equation. We are going to add the opposite. Don't forget to add the opposite. Combine like terms 21x plus negative 9 equals 180. And then I can add 9 to both sides. And that's going to give me, this is 0, so 21x equals 189. I can divide both sides by 21, and I have x equals 9. I'm not quite done. I have to plug that in over here. So the question is well, the value of x, I guess I can answer that part. X is 9. If I want to know the measure of the angles, then I actually have to plug that in. 5 times 9 would give me 45 for that one. So this one is 45. And 16 times 9 minus 9 would give me 144 minus 9, which is 135 for that angle. All right, so you can use what you know about equations, about straight angles, now about corresponding angles to analyze some more diagrams. So you're going to go to Seesaw here. There are 3 diagrams to analyze. It's like 3 problems, a couple little parts to each one. And then we will have an assessment tomorrow on lines and angles, and probably a couple things to do with volume, perhaps surface area, parallel, perpendicular lines, those types of things. All right, take on your homework.